Mhm. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Longevity Education Hub webinar with Dr. Nathan Price and Dr. Sherry Zhang from Healthspan Horizons and the Back Institute. We are very honored to have you all here. We will give it about a minute, minute and a half for people to transition from the waiting room to the actual webinar scene. And in the meantime, I would just like to remind everybody that the Longevity Education Hub offers free courses in healthy longevity medicine. That if you have not taken it yet, it will give you a great background for the future webinars. So we highly encourage you to visit our website at www.longevity.degree. And this webinar will have a Q&A session afterwards, so feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we will read them as soon as the presentation is complete. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to Dr. Evelyn Bishop, the founder of our Longevity Education Hub, who will do the further introductions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dominika. Thank you for all your great work in organizing the webinar. And thank you so much for both of our speakers today to be with us and to share a very, very inspiring, important initiative that is happening at the Buck Institute for research on aging, which is, of course, as we all know, the leading top institution worldwide, really putting the forefront and innovation in terms of aging and also aging medicine, longevity medicines, which is important for our core target audience here. And it's my greatest pleasure to introduce. Allow me to start with the lady, Nathan. At this
It
point of time, I would like to start with Dr. Sherry Zhang, who is the executive director of external strategy and partnerships at the Buck Institute, and who has a background in genomics and, of course, entrepreneurship. So she's really bringing two very, very unique angles into the field. And she's focusing specifically at Buck on building strategic collaborations and translating longevity research into something that's really graspable in terms of techs and industry, but also academia. And she's very passionate about education, as I have learned, which is why we are here today after our initial introduction call. And I'm also extremely honored to welcome Dr. Nathan Price, who is a professor at the Buck Institute and co-director of the Center of Human Health Span. A truly, I would love to say legend, but actually rising star, a very important figure in our field, bringing a lot of innovation in our medical field through his background research and basic research in the field. He's been really scaling large longitudinal cohort studies in the field, and he has been also very crucial in developing of approaches in healthcare that emphasize really continuous monitoring and collection of data in a precise and proper way, which brings me basically to the topic of this session. We will be talking about Horizons, the new initiative of Buck, which is very much focusing on what we doctors have to focus mostly on: getting the right evidence, collaborating, and through this also shaping the field by expanding our knowledge and sharing the data. Without further ado, Nathan, thank you so much once again, and the word is yours.
Yeah, well, well, thank you so much, and it's wonderful to be here with everyone, and also with my colleague, Dr. Sherry Zhang, as we're going to present to you a little bit about what we're doing at the Buck, our view on HealthSpan, and also this new HealthSpan Horizons initiative. So I'll go ahead and share the screen. Okay. All right. We will continue forward. So I want to start here on this paper that we just wrote for Cell Systems called "We Wait for Disease to Shout. What if we listened when biology whispered?" And I think that this is really at the heart of what a lot of us are thinking about as we imagine something, that here I'll call health span medicine or longevity medicine or whatever we want to call this. Which is that we know that we've had a healthcare system that is primarily focused on disease, and we focus very strongly here at the end on clinical symptoms. But there are many, many things that are happening in our bodies well before those clinical symptoms. And we want to focus down much earlier in terms of as risk manifests, what transitions look like, reversing those transitions, and being able to recognize subtle signals, and not just subtle signals of an impending disease, because disease is not really the goal, right? Life is the goal, health is the goal. And so what we really want to understand is all the subtlety of our body so that we can extend health span, ultimately indefinitely, right? But at least as much as we can, extend health span, we'd like to do that. And so this is really the focus of many of us, I think, that tune into something like this. Um, I also want to talk about this very exciting piece. When I speak in industry conferences, this is the slide that always gets cameras out and people take pictures of it, if you're not aware of this, which is the Deloitte 2022. Deloitte, if you're not aware, right, big industry consulting firm. A lot of people pay attention to them. And they have forecasted a $2 trillion shift in healthcare spend in the United States alone from this massive spend on treating sickness towards restoring health and promoting health. And so this is a tailwind that a lot of us are incredibly interested in, benefiting from as we think about the vision of the future that we're trying to achieve. Because unlike, when we first started talking about scientific wellness in 2013, there is in fact a lot of momentum out there in the world around this. I also wrote this piece for Scientific American publication that reviewed about 50 or so emerging startups and pieces in this space. And so we just see a lot of investment here, a lot of tailwinds. We could get into that in a lot more detail, but it is a huge factor to just know about whether you're in industry or in academia or a clinician or whatever. This makes a big difference. So my interest here, my starting point in this comes from something that Lee Hood and I have called scientific wellness. Um, and much like I just mentioned in the medical intervention, what we're really trying to do is to understand these earliest patterns of onset of disease, or actually we really want to understand wellness and what it is that it means to understand wellness. In fact, you can't really understand disease unless you first understand health. So that's a really important point. Right before the pandemic, I was on a panel with Chairman Emeritus of Harvard Medical School, and he put this in a way I really liked, which is that healthcare is the only industry that does not study its own gold standard, which is wellness, and really liked that. So our goals with scientific wellness and aligns with a lot of what our field is trying to do is to understand what drives wellness, what's happening early so that we can extend health span. And the idea behind scientific wellness is gathering really dense longitudinal data so we can start to make as much sense of that period of time as possible. This started for me back in 2013 with the Pioneer 100, which then we expanded to about 5,000 individuals. This was through a company that Lee Hood and I founded, which has since gone out of business, but has become the foundation for a lot of work and follow-on efforts that have happened since. We published the first paper on these in Nature Biotechnology back in 2017. But the idea here was just to gather a lot of deep longitudinal data. And as we're going to talk to you about this Healthspan Horizons initiative, this is our new effort to kind of scale that to be much, much bigger. So the kind of measurements we've been making on these individuals include whole genome sequencing. So we're getting millions of differences at the level of SNPs. Measuring labs, so clinical labs, metabolites, proteins for these studies. That was about 1,200 analytes. Gut microbiome. We're doing all of these a few times a year, 2 to 3 times a year, depending on which year we're talking about. Continual tracking with wearables. You create a database of actionable possibilities. And the idea is that individuals will stay with you over time. This allows you to create personal, dense, dynamic data, clouds, or deep phenotyping. And so I'm going to talk about a few of the things we learned from that and then springboard into why I think the future of this area is so much brighter even than the past. So the first thing I want to talk about is that the genome shapes interpretation of biomarkers, right? So we talk a lot about biomarkers, trying to understand what's happening, and the genome is vastly underutilized in medicine. And I want to talk about that a little bit. So we're probably all familiar with this very rapidly, very famous paper in our field that all, with all human traits are highly heritable, and including human lifespan, which according to this paper is about 50% heritable. There's different estimates out there. Um, this is the one I think I'm most aligned with at the moment. But let's just take that. So genetics has a big, big role here. Okay. Now, risk assessment in clinical context of biomarkers today, to a first approximation, doesn't consider genetics at all. There's a few isolated pockets, right? Maybe some listeners on here will say, well, my practice is actually doing X, Y, and Z, and that's probably true. But at a first approximation to 99% of the people in the healthcare system, genetics is not factored into the interpretation of biomarkers, and it should be. Here's another beautiful paper. This one's actually not mine. I think this is from this Bully et al. Paper. But this is a very clear example of this that I really like, which is that even though the genetics give risk, uh, the genetics highly influences how we should interpret risk. So, for example, if you have a low polygenic risk score um, for coronary artery disease, LDL cholesterol has zero predictive value to whether or not you're going to get that disease. However, if you have a middle polygenic risk score or a high risk, it's very predictive. So you should absolutely know the gene risk of a person if you're going to use this marker. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I'll show that some more. We had shown some of this for LDL cholesterol back in 2019. So let me just walk through this very quickly. So here, what we're doing is we had measurements in thousands of people, right, of their actual LDL cholesterol. That's what's plotted here, a normalized form of that here on the y-axis. And then here on the bottom, we've just bucketed into 5 groups based on the genetic risk profile of an individual. And what you'll see is that there's a fairly linear relationship. So the genome predicts about 12% of the variance of LDL, which may not sound like a lot, but it's actually quite significant. Well, it's highly statistically significant, and it's enough to move you from below range to above range on a clinical test. So then the question is, should we treat people differently if they're high in LDL cholesterol because of genetics versus not? And so what we showed, and I think this was the first paper that did this, is that you could predict the outcome of a lifestyle intervention based on genetics. So if you had a big gap, in other words, if these people predicted that if they had high LDL cholesterol and their genome predicted low, they could move. However, if their genome predicted high and they were also high, we saw no statistically significant ability for them to lower LDL cholesterol. Right? So genetics can predict your likelihood of being able to succeed in moving a particular biomarker. Okay. All right. Or just to put that very explicitly, right, we have 2 individuals that come in a clinical context. They're both elevated. The thing that matters is this gap, right? So individual 1, if predicted low, and individual 2 predicted high, if we take them through a program, what we're measuring here is basically separating what is the genetic component of the biomarker value and what is the environmental or lifestyle component. And only one of those is modifiable without really hammering it with a drug. And so we were able to show that this modifiability gap was predictive of response to intervention. Now that we published some years ago, but what we've been doing since over the last year is we've now applied this to a whole host of different biomarkers. And what we found is that there was a statistically significant signal in all the biomarkers we tested except one. And some of those signals are relatively small, so I think, probably not terribly clinically meaningful, but there were a whole bunch that were meaningful, meaning that we had seen in LDL cholesterol and HDL and hemoglobin A1C before looks to be quite broadly applicable. For what it's worth, we're developing these out. We are, as far apparently the first group in the United States that has access to the Million Genome Project, the Emirati Genome Program in the United Arab Emirates. And one of the things we're developing for them is a gap analysis for the deployment into clinical medicine, ultimately, of genomic interpretation now that they've done genome sequencing of their entire citizenry. So that is an incredible opportunity, and we're going to be doing that here in the U.S. as well through some. I guess it's still getting worked out exactly which avenues, but there's multiple that will be coming out. But this is important because if you think about this, this is an entirely new category of variable to introduce in a clinical interpretation, which is not just your biomarker, but the difference between your genetic predicted value of that marker and it. And I think this is going to be hugely important, and we're now really accelerating on this, and we're in a good spot to do that. Okay. So now let me switch to systems biomarkers here. So let's talk about biological age. In the interest of time, I'm not going to say much about this. I think we're all pretty familiar with the biological age, the age your body says as opposed to the age the calendar says you are. And you can derive this from a variety of different factors. The way that I really like this Clamara-Duval algorithm. And one of the big reasons for applying this in a biological age is that it forces the slope of the line that you fit to be very close to one. This is important if you're going to use this longitudinally because it means that in a cohort, the expectation is that you would tick up 1 year per year in the cohort. Okay. So I mentioned this because we did apply this to a variety of different biological age scores. We developed one for metabolomics, one for proteomics, one for clinical labs, and one that did all the omics jointly. And did this on data from 3,500 people. This was way back. We published this, well back in 2019. But we showed two things here that are important. One is that when we looked at disease in this, and what I want you to notice are the asterisks here, which denote different levels of statistical significance. And the big thing I want you to notice is that all of these stars, all of the asterisks here, are on the right side, meaning that in every single case where there was a statistically significant difference, disease was associated with higher biological age. And we saw no examples of where the disease was associated with lower biological age, because that meant it's meaningful, right? Because you can always fit a biological age. The question is the delta, is the difference in fact meaningful? This suggested it was. And then even more interesting, at least from my standpoint, was that as people were going through a scientific wellness program, what happened to the biological age? And what we saw was that overall there was a negative 0.16 years per year change in biological age, right, per chronologic year in the program. Women did particularly well. Their biological age was actually going down by 0.5. So that's a 1.5 year per year improvement versus expectation, right? Because going up 1 year per year is expected. Men didn't do as well. They were going up at a rate of 0.2, so 1 year every 5. And so that was an improvement of 0.8 years per year relative to expectation. I won't get into it. There was one big outlier here, which was me for men, which I went down by 2.5 years per year, 4 years in a row while I was going through this. We can talk about what happened there, but mine actually fell from my chronologic age to 10 years younger going through. I'm not 100% sure why I was such a major outlier there. My only real hypothesis is like going through a wellness program will get you some benefit as a man, and founding it will get you a lot. I don't know. That's maybe the way it goes. But anyway. Um, the other element here that I want to talk about briefly is a biological BMI score. So we published this in Nature Medicine a few years ago. You basically compute it very similarly to how you do a biological age, but you're trying to gather deep information about health states related broadly to a BMI score. BMI is a very coarse score. So you have people that are more metabolically healthy and less metabolically healthy. And for those individuals, what this can do is sort of disambiguate that. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later as I get you into the systems that we've built. And then I didn't want to spend a lot of time here, so I just summarized a whole bunch of things that we've been able to do on another data type, which is the microbiome, which I think is incredibly important to the future of this space and pretty important in the present. And we were able to publish a bunch of papers on this, but some of the real key things that came out were that your microbiome becomes increasingly differentiated, more unique to you as you get older. That uniqueness score was actually predictive of all-cause mortality. We had we were able to show that the microbiome has some really big effects on drugs. For example, the statins. It turns out that people that have a certain type of microbiome can get double the lowering of LDL cholesterol by the same dosage of statins than other people. And also, only certain kinds of microbiomes, two out of the four broad categories, saw elevations in one of the big downsides of statins, which is that you get a 9% increase in the rate of diabetes. And we only saw evidence of diabetes markers changes in certain kinds of microbiome. So it suggests that microbiome is important for both drug efficacy as well as side effect profiles. And that's really underappreciated, I think, right now. We were also able to show that hundreds of health and disease markers correlate with microbiome composition, et cetera. So there's a lot that you can learn from these kind of data just to interpret new data types like the microbiome that we know relatively little about by connecting it to measurements that we know quite a lot about. Okay, so that's a little bit around the future of diagnostics and how we think, and a bit of a background that's going to lead into where we're going to talk to you next, which is like, what are we really doing now at the intersection of AI and Healthspan, and in this new program that we are developing called Healthspan Horizons that Sherry and I are co-leading, with the goal really to make Healthspan measurable, predictable, and modifiable. And with that, I'll turn the time over to Sherry.
Thank you, Nathan. If you don't mind, then please operate from your end. And I want to say thank you, Evelyn, for wonderful invitation to this really impactful community that you're building. My mother is 40 years teacher, so I understand the power and also the devotion of education. And I hope, by volunteering, you invited us, Nathan and I get a little benefit from that. We know that will extend our longevity. So I hope the future generations of longevity medicine, will be very grateful for what you're building here. So personally, very thankful for inviting me. So you have heard, from Nathan, what is the opportunity and why we think healthspan extension is one of the greatest opportunities for longevity medicine and also humanity. And that we also appreciate from his deep and broad insight of how important, how critical we need to understand and, knowing how biomarkers are interacting with each other to drive this. But knowing we have 3.2 billion letters in our genomes alone, we have thousands of proteins and proteomics can measure. We have trillions of cells in your gut, on your skin, as we can measure now as species of microbiome, and so on and so forth, right? So as longevity doctors, you will be a good thing is you will never short of problems to solve. You are not going to running out of patients to help. That's fantastic. But at the same time, in this era of explosion of data, in this era of AI, you're gonna face a lot of softwares, technologies and patients coming through your doors with all these questions. How we gonna make all of these data in some sense, right? So I want to start my side of a conversation. This is a conversation that I want to put you through a thought process that Nathan, me, and the leaders in the Healthspan Science has shared to really talk through. Let's take a one step back so that we can really understand what is a health span, what are the biomarkers underneath it, so we can really measure it, predict it, and hopefully modify it, right? So, and next slide, please. And at the end of the day, I think you are here to care about your patients today and tomorrow, and we are here too for that. Through Arabelle, through the company I built in the past, we have this fantastic opportunity to talk through thousands and thousands of individuals. They share so deeply their life journeys with us. Each of them, including me, we are a live open book. Journey of health is so complex and so hard to tackle. That's also make this incredibly motivating for us. So Molly, for example, 52 years old, a high exec of a healthcare tech company as a finance VP, very well educated, very vibrant, successful in career, recently divorced, two kids, one in high school, one in college. Right? We've seen a lot of those profiles coming through longevity clinics. And her, so Molly and so are all of your patients, I will bet they don't wake up thinking about biomarkers. What are they thinking about when they wake up? They think about how do they feel today. Molly was probably thinking about in the situation I outlined for you, why I'm feeling so tired where I actually went to bed at 9:30 last night. I tumbled, I cannot get my deep sleep. All my apps and showing exactly that. I don't need that to tell me I'm not feeling well, right? That's the patients wake up with. So biomarkers is for Nathan, for me to worry about. But the feeling, how do we help Molly to feel empowered to succeed, just like when she's at her peak, 35, 45, and so on, is your job. It's a very, very noble job, right? So just a little bit into clinical side of things. She's by all means traditional clinical measure healthy, mostly healthy. She's undiagnosed with pre-diabetic, which we know in this country, in the US, we have 90 million people undiagnosed pre-diabetic, right? That's just not acceptable. And she does sense that she didn't know that, which we can help her by measuring her blood. But she did notice for many years now, she was used to be very slim in her standard, but now she's BMI 26. As a clinician, you know that's borderline overweight. And she's trying very hard without medications to try to get that under control. Sometimes she does, sometimes she's not successful. If we measure her biological BMI, so as biological aging, as Nathan just showed, that can only done in our lab, that she's actually 28 for the biological BMI. That means her organs and systems, metabolic flexibility, everything is aging faster than her calendar year, right? So all these are underlying issues that she knows. She knows before anyone else, before doctors, because she feels not herself anymore. The worst news there is she's away and away from her the Molly, the full Molly lively her more distantly every day, right? So she's coming to your door, for example, for, okay, I'm interested in losing weight, but I'm not sure I want to take a GLP-1 that helped so many of my friends already. Almost feel like, in 3 weeks they changed into a new them, but I'm not sure it's for me or not. Secondly, she's deeply into her menopause, right? So she knows she's changing. She knows she's moody a lot of times. She wants to test her cortisol. She wants to test her estrogen so that you can help her as the longevity doctor to tailor a personalized plan to maybe put her into estrogen hormone therapy to get her back, right? So all these are the questions you're going to see a lot. We're talking about millions and millions of people going to come through your door. By the way, I think from 2025 to 2026 is the first year that inside of America, I'm sure this is a global pattern, that people are 65 years older for the first time exceeds the number of people, young people below 18, right? So the whole structure of our population has changing for older. As I said, it's the biggest problem, biggest gap you can help close. Okay, thank you, Nathan. Thanks. So I want to just talk through quickly what are the thought processes we've been through to this quest of identifying what exactly to measure, help defining what exactly measurable, predictable, and modifiable health ban. So there's a four schools of thoughts when people try to approach this very important question. One is we define healthspan as disease-free survival. As you can see, if this, let's put everything in Molly's case, that will be too late for her, right? And then the second plan B is functional independence. Okay, let's detect where Molly has the first onset of bone loss, muscle loss, cognitive health decline, such as dementia, or even the earliest one. But it is still fragmented and siloed, but also too late in our likes for her. The third one is okay, you're talking about feeling. Let's ask Molly, when do you feel what? But we know that's highly subjective. It's prone to make a lot of errors, which it's gonna be a very important stream of data, but it's not gonna show us the whole picture. We still need a deep biology insights to put all these into one big picture for Molly. And then the fourth one is something really interesting. You probably have seen or tried a lot of recent, reports to claim they will do your biological aging with, for example, a lot of them are clocks, right, based on CPG, epigenetic across the genome. As a matter of fact, fun fact, actually, I did the first the EWAS, the epigenomic genome-wide screening for metabolic syndrome when I was 2 lives ago when I was deeply in the lab, and it was a lot of fun, very, very interesting that direction. But as a in this grand picture of helping Molly, I would argue that that is important, valuable information of knowing how old your whole system is, your brain is, your blood is, and your heart is, as they evolve, right? But it's still very fragmented, one-siloed data stream. And next, please. So I want to land on what is the health span. What we are fully aligned as the builders, providers, something you can take it away with if you haven't, is health span is the years living in good health. It's still very complex, but we can fully align with it. And the next job is to identify how do we measure, what are the processes and cascades of biomarkers can support a measurable, predictable, modifiable health span. And I want to always go back to Molly, your patient. For Molly, please be reminded what to her health span is really about the years she fully feel herself, right? So next I want to talk about, this is we kind of touch upon Molly's problem is a global problem. We have a lot of work done by other groups, and we're getting into the quantification side of things, really fully examining what's the value of your gained fully healthy year, month, week, and day. So in this seminal work that we synthesized the insights and published in, you can find our white paper to read about the details of the evidence. What I want to really draw your attention are a few points. One, I know this is a little bit fine print, but if you can trail the blue line, there's a hard blue line, and then there's a dotted blue line, right? You can just trail the space between the two for me for a second. You can see, so the top is the lifespan average of the past 2 decades for United States. Ish, right? And it's going up a little bit. And then the dotted lines dotted line, blue line represents the health span of United States over the 2 decades. Because you can see we actually continue to drive the extension of the lifespan, but it's not proportional for the health span. It's actually widening already. This is before the hit of the COVID, by the way. So it's independent of the pandemic. And then similarly, if you trail I think it's pink, dark pink, and that's the high income nation of Europe. So yes, you can see it's doing better than the U.S. Costs less, by the way. Again, fine prints, I'll read it for you. We also calculate, well, they calculate the per capita health expenditure. So for the globe, which is the orange line, solid line, it costs per capita $1,500 per person when we extend the health years versus sorry, the Europe is $5,000 and US is double that. So that means we done poor job of extending the health span, but we also spend double of per person cost us for working on that, right? So there's just a lot of discrepancies in this economy that we have to help correct. Next, please. Yeah, we just go through this quickly. So we looked into what does it mean for the years you can gain when we talk about the shortening the gap. So on average, we spend about decade spent in poor health as a global humanity. That's a lot of productivity loss, as you can imagine. And if we look at the yearly worth, it's estimated to be worth more than $2,100 per healthy year. And then in women, we spend 2.4 years more years in poor health than men. And I think there's an interesting trend, which I will come back to, that Nathan also showed. When we do the modifiable health span extension, women actually see more dramatic improvement than men because of the background, possibly. Next, please. You don't need me to tell you we're in this hurricane of that health data. We have deep biology data. It's very rich, but it's sparse over time as itself. We have, EHR and so on, the clinical data, scanning data. They're long, but they're biological shallow overall. And wearables are great continuous data stream, but they are usually poorly contextualized. So the mission we are taking on at Buck as part of building this platform Horizons is really architecture such that we could contextualize deep data, long data, and make it useful for populations, individuals. Next, please. Based on National Academies of Sciences and other organizations looking into the reuse value of data, we know we actually, if we harmonize the existing data through federation model, we actually can increase the insight and reuse value by 2 to 4 times. So we're saving as a team, as a global team, a lot of money, a lot of effort by utilizing existing data into something actionable. Next, please. So I wanted to challenge this group and to think about how do we reframe our goal as clinicians. So in a nutshell, it's no longer just extending life, but it's really shifting how we monitor the trajectories of Molly's decline in our axis that she can feel differently so that we can get her back to the best her. Next, please. And I want to just show you briefly, this is also part of a white paper that you can download from our website, that large US and European studies have shown that favorable metabolic profiles and behavioral profiles can extend disease-free years by 7 to 11 years, depends on what kind of regimens they put the subjects on. Here you can also see 2 out of 3 cases, women actually benefit more than men, knowing they are already spent more years in poor health, and this is really a really good indication. So we know health span is modifiable. It's not a hardwired problem in the human biology. It's really up to us to design the system so we can help them to make the right modifiable behavioral change, which is hard to do. As I said, Horizons want to take on this as a mission of education, just like Evelyn is doing with you, that we want to become a live, ongoing resources, credible, very deeply grounded in science always, and share our thesis as an open question, open forum. How do we tackle, how do we define healthspan so we can help the humanity to extend it? Next, please. And we also explore a very bold idea. As an operator, I scale scientific solutions to individuals at scale, which is very hard to do, as you can imagine, because you have to personalize it and then you have to operationalize the scale. One thing I learned from all my lessons is in order to make something accessible, you have to make them translational. You have to make Molly as a very smart, successful, powerful individual to understand what are all these blood work. You take my DNA, you take my other, all the specimens you can. You ask me hundreds of questions. I come to you often. What's in there for me? How do I translate that to my beauty, my energy, my recovery, my confidence, my intelligence, so I can be the best mom, best partner, and best VP for my company, right? So we need to, in order to scale that to masses, we have to translate this into a translatable narrative, and then we have to back it up by science. So if you read our white paper, you'll see our thinking about this, and we welcome your feedback. Next, please. And on the left, you will see a traditional, current, common artificial intelligence supported modeling. We're talking about a event-based risk curve of 10-year cardiovascular, right? Cumulative events at certain threshold we claim as is a risky profile for Molly. But we know that's too late and too little. So on the right side is what we are trying to approach this altogether as a trajectory monitoring model where we can measure Molly's different spans and healthspan overall as a functional capacity over time, so that we can help her if she's on that blue trajectory, we can get her back to the orange trajectory, maybe even better. Next, please. And this is our under the hood picture. The reason I want to show you is we are building a trusted research environment. We want to stay in a very neutral zone so that we can empower practitioners like yourself, biotech, and individuals to make the right decisions. In order to do that, we need to earn your trust. So we're building this federated data intelligence platform through our flagship initiative at Buck, known as Healthspan Horizons, where intelligence moves to us, but data stays at where they are safely governed. Next, please. I believe this is my, just kind of recap of this rethinking model. I encourage you with us, think longitudinally. And Molly's life is long and it's deep. It's chaotic, right? Just like ours. So think along with her if you want to really provide engaging, recurring longevity care for Molly. Secondly, we showed you how deep the data, how complex the data is. We encourage you to leverage people like us and others who interpret the data of Molly in systems, not in silo, not just one report or not even just one organ. You need to really think in the light of systems biology, which we are the expert for. And then thirdly, if a, 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 a regimen that Molly cannot easily take on and change and use on a Tuesday afternoon is not going to stick with her forever. So focus on the modifiable drivers we can identify, for example, the genetic modifiable factors, and that those subtle small things that can help Molly empower her to make the right decisions consistently. The fourth is act early. As I hope you are convinced from all the discussions from our side that usually when the risk shows by the threshold, it's already too late. All right. I think Nathan gonna take us home by showing you all of these complex questions can be actually answered through today's technology and application.
So I'm just going to check in with Evelyn. I know we're at time now. Is it okay if I take a little bit more to say something about
Oh,
the
please
AI
go
system?
ahead.
Okay,
No,
please, because I really
absolutely.
want to get into this. This is probably the heart of everything.
Please, our pleasure.
Okay. So, so I want to talk about personalization and depth at scale. So AI and the future of health span, which is a lot of what we're trying to catalyze with this Healthspan Horizons program. Um, Very much believe this, right? I think that we're probably all in alignment of this. If we can get a state of abundance out of AI, what we would mostly like to achieve is an abundance of health, right? And an ability to expand health span. That's what really focused on as much as possible. So one thing I want to talk about is that AI systems actually let us think about data analysis in ways that we've never been able to think about before. Um, and there I'll do the short versions. It's for a little over time, but the way that I think is so interesting here is in the past, like as soon as you take your proteomics data or your metabolomics data or health data or track or whatever it is, you put it into a data matrix, right? Once you've done that, those numbers are just numbers. And we do all kinds of interesting, sophisticated analyses on those, but they are numbers at the end of the day. And we don't have to do only that anymore at scale. As you build these AI agents, they can actually know, and I'll put that in air quotes. We have a philosophical discussion about them not knowing or whatever, but they can have context that that number that they're looking at is a protein, that it's made primarily in the liver, that it's associated with these three diseases, that it's et cetera, et cetera. So we can actually build what I think is a brand new field, basically, of context aware data analysis where we can delve in and apply intelligence at scale to piecing together what's happening across all of these different um, analyses, piecing the pieces together. And that's what I'm super excited about right now. And we can talk about that more in Q&A if there's interest. So we're building two AI systems as part of Healthspan Horizons. Healthspan Compass, which I'm going to show you a little bit more about, and Healthspan Synthesizer. So Healthspan Synthesizer takes data, and basically what we're trying to do with it is to automate the process that we used when we wrote our, a couple of dozen papers off of that dense multi-omic data set that I mentioned. And every time we do that, right, that's a year or two of a person's life. A postdoc or a grad student that's spending their, everything on that in order to turn that into a beautiful paper with some insight, right? Some nugget. And what Synthesizer is attempting to do is to automate that entire process so that we can do that every night, basically, or many times a night. It sort of becomes just a function of buying compute at that stage. So those things are not smart enough yet. We have operational version of this. It's not as smart as we are yet, but it's learning rapidly, right? And so this is going to allow us to just leverage. So when I said before that what we had done with like the Aravail program, the Pioneer 100, and having these 5,000 individuals, as we think about Healthspan Horizon or any effort to aggregate this really deep data now, it's exponentially more valuable today than it was in the past because we can harness it exponentially better. Now, on the flip side, with things like Compass, Compass is aimed at the individual. This is tied in part to this up to $52 million award we got from ARPA-H. Our part of that is to build something called the N of one analyzer. So we're trying to dive in deeply to what can we say for a person. That's what Compass does. And so on the individual level, these sort of data are exponentially more usable for individuals. So you kind of have an exponentially rising data with exponentially rising ability to analyze it and exponentially rising ability to develop depth and personalization at scale. Those things have never existed before. And so what we're trying to do is to catalyze that by both bringing together all the data with various partners and then launching these two systems. And so the thing that I want to just end with is to showcase or just show you a little bit about this system that we've built so that you can have a concrete idea of the kind of things that we're building and that are coming. And, there's so much excitement as we all have in this space. So I'm going to stop sharing this at the moment and switch to a demo that hopefully will work. I have a backup video, but I do think the demo will showcase there. So just one moment. I'll pop over here. Let me just share the demo screen here. Okay. All right, so this is the system. It's in demo mode here, so it's not quite ready for prime time. I want to be clear about that up front, but I wanted to give you a sense of where we're at, and we're hoping to release this onto the website in a limited version this summer and in a full version this fall. So let me just show you kind of what. Oh, whoops, I got to go back there. We've built many agents. I saw that it's changed on me to the default agent. We want Healthspan Horizon. So you can get under the hood here and see all the many, many, many AI systems that we are building. Where is Healthspan Compass AI? Here we go. I had this loaded up, but the website apparently decided to send it back to the default. All right, I'll just take you through a guided tour in the interest of time. So this is based obviously on a large language model for streaming text. There's all kinds of things you can do in the background. And in a future date, I'll tell you more about the HealthSpan science architecture that we're building that sits behind this, which I'm quite excited about, but we'll not quite ready to get into that yet. So what this is it's an agentic AI system. So it has the large language models, but it also has a bunch of different things that it will compute. So we can ask a question, show me where my health stands today. So this is one person's data. This is one person that went through, it's actually a subset of the Airville data set, which was part of this Providence clinical trial that we did. But anyway, it's we're going to look at one person's data. So the first thing that pops up is pretty table stakes, all of his various different clinical labs. And in this case, it is a 53-year-old man. You can click through this and so forth and see like where these line up. Now we can also look at peer comparison. So the next question we're doing here is compare him to people that are, well, men of his age. So it will go into that 5,000 background cohort. It will pull out the examples and it will then chart. So now he can see where he's at compared to 10 years younger, 10 years older. He sees he's about that. He's about, where he would expect for someone 10 years older than him. Probably doesn't love that. Could make goals around that and so forth. Now, the next thing though, is we can get into that genetic prediction. So I'll just say yes here in the interest of time. But you can see that the next question that we have in here is, should we dive into genes versus lifestyle, right? So this is an ad. For what it's worth, you can just ask this. It recognizes that you're asking about genes. That flips into this tool that we built on DNA analysis. So I taught you at the beginning about that gap, that new way to think about markers and their genetic prediction. This turns it into a personalization, right? So his DNA predicts that he should have good HDL cholesterol levels, and he doesn't. This is a opportunity. So it maps that out. And it does so for all of the different markers for which we have a good reason to believe that his body will work with him rather than against him. You can also see where he's beating his genes substantially. That's only true for LDL cholesterol. You won't be surprised why. He's on a drug for that. But now I can ask to do a look at the biological profile, which is based on omics data. So this will then pop up a different engine. It will go in, it loads his data. Now I'm computing his biological age, I'm computing his biological BMI, and it's doing a microbiome analysis of the diversity of his microbiome. We haven't built out the microbiome piece very much yet. It's just a demonstration around diversity. but you can see that he gets biological age. He gets a variety of different biological ages by source, right? If we had epigenetics, we could add that one in as well. He can see his biological BMI, microbiome, etc. I can also ask it to track progress over time. So what this will do, in his case, we have 3 years of data. And so you can dive in and understand what does his personal trajectory look like. Um, and so it will pop up, run this analysis here as it's doing here in the background, um, loading up his measurements and then generating plots. Okay, so now, as you can see, you can look at the time for these. These are all organized into different health areas, can click through. And one of the pieces that we were pretty excited to add in here too is we've also been able to pull, we now have access to historical environmental data from every zip code in the United States. So he can also look at environmental trajectories. Shouldn't interpret a correlation here by putting them on the same plot, but you can visualize, um, ozone or particulate matter or anything like that because we did add environment in there. Hired a really fantastic environment expert, Cavan Ward Cavanis, who's come into the lab now. Some of you may know him. He's fantastic. Um, and was running a big program at the EPA prior to coming. And so he's really helping us out here. So you can get visualizations. I won't go through all of us at this time, but you can look at the day, the 5-day average, 1 year, and just see if there's anything in the environment that is particularly of interest. And then finally, what I wanted to showcase here is that you can then take all of this information together and then do what we're really interested in, which is to make recommendations to an individual that given all this information, what do we think you should do? And a bit of a forecast. So again, as I mentioned, he's a 53-year-old man. This is roughly the time period in which, based on his current measurements, we think he will start having some serious medical issues that will interrupt his health span. We give him a summary back of his weight. Interestingly, his biological BMI, I neglected to say this in my hurry, but it's shows that even though he's overweight, his biological BMI, his blood measurements actually indicate that he appears to be more metabolically unhealthy than that weight would suggest. Right? That can go both ways. This is again that Nature Medicine paper that we had a little while ago. It tells him why these matter. If we had time, you could read through. The text here can get very specific. This talks about the biggest return based on his genes. So this now tells him based on his genetic potential where his most benefit is. And I'll just read one of these. So you can actually click on different actions that he might take, and you'll see that the forecast gets a little bit better as he takes positive action. And so here it's replace refined carbs with legumes, intact grains, and vegetables. That's relatively generic, but it gives him a lot of context. Your insulin dropped from 27.8 to 14.9 on the program, right? A major win. But your DNA says it should sit around 9.4. So he has a sense of both where he was, how he's been progressing, where target is, and how can he get to that target. In the interest of time, I won't go through too much of these, but you can keep um, having personalized recommendations, getting the forecasting to be better. You can do a similar thing here in the environment and a similar thing in the microbiome. And I'll stop there. But in the system, he can ask follow-up questions. He can ask it to graph different things against each other. He can ask exploratory questions, and basically it just opens this up. So one of the things that we will be releasing then here through the Healthspan Horizons program is is access to this system for one, an ability for people to contribute in their data. And then for people that come in and are contributing their data in, this will allow us to capture lots of different types of data. So we're talking to lots of companies that may come in here and partner, right, and bring in a lot of their consumer base. A lot of conversations going on with the NIH right now, maybe, to see, what kind of avenues we can explore for getting funding for multi-omics data. If someone's doing a commercial blood draw, we get extra, blood in, we do all of the omics data and so forth. So with that, I just want to end on this. Few problems touch every human life. Health span optimization is one of them. And happy to take any questions in the time remaining. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation and the demo. To be honest, this is the most advanced and the most details kind of
Yeah, I wanted to
longevity
at least show it. Like we're pretty happy
personalized.
about it.
So that's amazing, and I can't wait for it to launch publicly. There are some questions in the internet. In the interest of time, we will limit them a little bit, but I will take my privilege of a host and ask my first question. So you said you would plan to launch this system to people like kind of the ChatGPT version they can just Google and access. If they upload their own data that is from different clinics and different types of measurements, aren't you afraid that since the tests are not standardized, it will impact the quality of analysis?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I'm less, I'll put it this way. I am worried, but I'm a lot less worried than I would have been in the past. So, so one element of, so when we did Aravel, for example, we had to build a really extensive data cleaning structure behind it. And that's not just from the data cleaning, but also like at all the different vendors. Like we had a vat of blood, like well mixed split blood that would get spiked into every proteomics measure, every metabolomics measure, and so forth. We would every 50th sample, we would send out a duplicate sample unbeknownst to the lab. That was something we'd already sent them before, so we had like really good understanding of variability, and we built all that, right? Um, that is true that right now, with people uploading data and this being like a more open federated model, we don't have the same ability to control data quality. Now, we might select particular partners and have subsets or recommended vendors that we'll go with where we have a Healthspan Horizons protocol. That's something that we are going to be evaluating. Um, in terms of formats and so forth, the AI systems are a lot more flexible, so it's a lot easier to ingest different forms of data. We will be doing lots of analysis on the back end to try to correct for things, get rid of data if we find that there are certain things that we don't believe in and so forth. But to me, I think the flexibility and scaling aspect is, we had 5,000 like really well done, really carefully controlled, mostly full data matrices in Aravel. This time I'd rather have 100,000 messy like flows and try to deal with it on the AI interpretation side because as I was mentioning on that context aware data analysis, we can build agents that actually have some nuance to them about, hey, if I'm getting this data from this source, it has these issues compared to the like we're going to try to deal with it more on that side because we can just build so much more intelligence than in the past. So yeah, it's a great question. It's really a great question.
We're also going
And
to
that's a
offer
great
our
answer.
own. We're going to offer our own testing. So by doing that, we will help to standardize as well.
That is true. We
Okay.
are going to develop, like, so if people are coming in and they want to get like omics testing or something like we'll have, yeah, we are, that is true. So we will have a like standardized form eventually as well. But
So we
but
can
we
risk a
will,
statement that the Back Institute is opening a clinic?
no.
No,
I wouldn't call
that
it,
would be
it's
exciting
going to
though.
be an open IRB study. Yeah.
Right.
We'll make it
Okay.
accessible for sure.
But it will be,
Right.
but people could use
Lovely.
it, right? People could use it.
Definitely. I see some people raising hands, so just a question to the attendees, please put it in the Q&A box because I am not able to give you like a voice access. But one question from the anonymous attendee here. Do you think we should start the interventions broad from the whole body biological age and then drill down, or should we go organ specific from the start?
Um, that's that's a really interesting question as well. I th I think it depends. I mean, if you're really unhealthy at things that you can target like globally, that probably makes it like if you're really overweight, for example, fixing that is going to make a lot more difference than, a targeted supplement related to, as much as, I am CSO of Thorne, I love supplements, but it's like, in certain cases, but it's like, but it's going to make a much bigger difference to address those macro things. That said, the other element, and this is why I really like the spans framework that Sherry talked about, um, and is that it also it really matters what your weakest link is. couple examples. So one is the, when we had someone coming through Aravale, for example, we had kind of as just kind of on a lark, we had taken all the data and like rank ordered it from like, healthiest, a little bit. And one of the people that on standard clinical labs and fitness would have been thought of as being like one of the most healthy people in the whole cohort. Um, she actually got stage 4 pancreatic cancer and died. And this was a terrible, you know, terrible tragedy, for her to get that. But it was such a stark reminder that macroscopically you can be good, but if you have, it's that whatever the worst problem is that's going on, that is um, that is really critical. And it is one of the reasons why I think that deep molecular measurements are important and do drive a lot, even if you feel like, good on your day to day, because you want to have a sense. So there is a balance there.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. And speaking of that molecular details here, there's another question coming back to the very beginning of your presentation. Somebody is asking a very pragmatic question. So, if my polygenic risk score of coronary artery is low, but my LDL is through the roof, should I completely ignore it?
Um, You know what? I'm thinking about that. I don't want to give medical advice, so talk to your doctor. The data did show that for people with low polygenic risk score, um, that there was no detectable signal related to that. That said, I'd be, if your individual case, yeah, definitely could consider everything and talk to your doctor.
Right. Lovely. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time because we're going over time, but there are so many questions still in the Q&A box. If that's
Yeah,
okay, I will.
I'm fine. I
You're
blocked the half
you're
hour.
fine? Okay. Well, if you are fine, then we can surely get 5 minutes more. Thank you so much for
Other
it. I
people may want
appreciate
to start peeling off. I would understand.
it.
But
Right.
we can
Well,
certainly.
okay. There is actually a lot of interest in purchasing the software you just demonstrated. So you might be getting a lot of commercial emails. And let me see what is biological
Okay.
here
The
because I
lab
don't
is
want to
open
be
for business. So if you want
right.
to,
Right.
make a
We
deal,
can
Great.
channel
talk to
some
me.
of these later as well. We can maybe spend more time answering each of the remaining questions, if that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. So like, I will put them more business-wise at the email later, not to put you in the commercially shady position here. But a question, will interventions be targeted geographically? For example, North American diet versus MENA versus Southeast Asia?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know. Well, I'll say something I imagine Sherry will want to add to this too. We will definitely be thinking a lot about different regions. I mentioned we have a major partnership with the United Arab Emirates and Emirati Genome Program there, for example. So that will be a very different population and different diet, obviously, than what we're doing here in the US. Um, Healthspan Horizons itself is definitely, relatively US centric, and I expect we'll start that way and eventually we'll differentiate it. Sherry, you want to add to that? And you've done a lot of genetics of different populations. So.
Yeah, just to add to that, we know in the health overall globally too, it's very much skewed towards white. The insights, especially for genomics platforms that we all focus on in the past endeavors. But going forward, knowing that we will be very much sensitive to how do we really equalize the insights, because the insights is as strong as the references, diversity, right? That's the basics of the genomics reference.
And one thing I do want to add there is, because you can take into account, race and ethnicity and things like that, and that's important. But the genome itself is so much more specific. Like it incorporates that plus a lot more, right? Because you can have certain genes that are more prevalent in a population, but having your genetics lets you know, do you have it, which is much more relevant. And so we do take into account genetics in a few different ways. One is like even in the biological age, we do like a PCA analysis of the genome. So you get, a very broad like movement of where you're at in you know, by, loosely, race or ethnicity or things like that. That makes a difference, and you get localized, in that way. And then, of course, we take into account all the individual genetics and variants and so forth. So, so I think ultimately, I believe the genome is kind of the ultimate unlock to that as we get better and better at reading signals from diverse populations. And there's a lot and one of the things I do love about how the Emirati Genome Program was put together is they did their own citizens, but they also chose selected subgroups around the world or populations that were really underrepresented across all of genomics, and they've tried to fill in some of those gaps. So I think and programs like the All of Us program and so forth have been trying to, do that as well. And so it is still highly skewed. Um, it's getting better, but the genome itself, I think, is really the unlock, just learning how to read it for each person.
Great. And I think it's actually such a turn in longevity medicine and genealogy science because over the past few years we've been hearing it's all about epigenetics, 90% epigenetics, genes don't matter at all kind of narrative. So I'm happy to see more new ones here.
Genes matter.
Right. Right. Okay, and let it be the final question here. So, for the clients that are non-premium who can't afford all high-end wearables and all the tests you mentioned, do you also plan on providing enough data to perhaps a foundational model or some kind of advanced generative AI that could predict what would be, let's say, their microbiome taxonomy based on other biomarkers they have access to?
Yes. This is a great question, and I think it's at the heart of the whole field, and I think AI is going to be a really important aspect to this. You basically always want, by layering all these like dense data types on top of them, we really want to have in there really cheap types of data. Like like one cheap one is like voice analysis on a phone is a really cheap one. There's like passive information. There's also just basic physical tests that a person can do, et cetera. And so one of the things that we always want to do is to try to see from every expensive data, every time we have expensive data and cheap data that are integrated together in a population, you're trying to figure out how many signals can I pull out of the cheap data source that predicts things that are important into the expensive data source. And for what it's worth, and I've actually made this, I made this argument on I was at a panel for a TD Cowen event recently, right, which is a huge money investment bankings, like that kind of thing. And this came up, right, this dichotomy between, you know, the like they were kind of pushing like, are you choosing to be a really high end, like going for people who can afford everything, or low end for like just try to get as many people as possible? And I really feel like that's a false dichotomy because and partly for the reason I just gave, which is I think some of these programs that are initially like really aimed at individuals who can pay for all those kind of data, that is not against the interest of what we want to do for the broad population. It's actually probably an essential enabling step for the reason I just gave, because if you're getting all that dense data and someone's paying or someone's got to pay for it, so it's either publicly funded or privately funded, right? But as you do that, it's that layering of the cheap and the expensive data together that enables you to build the model that then translates out to everybody. So I actually think that they're both important. I actually think that they're synergistic. Um, so it might feel not great in the short run, but in the longer run, I think it's enabling to us getting to where we want to go in terms of just being able to make this broadly applicable, accessible to everybody at reasonable cost.
No, definitely. That's a great analogy. Like if you think like the first computers were also like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now everybody can buy one.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And they weren't as good as the thing you got in your in your pocket, right? Not even close. But someone had to
right,
pay for the ridiculous expensive sort of novelty computers at the beginning of the time, right? So,
definitely. Well, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Thank you for allowing us to break the record of attendance and numbers of questions. So we are very, very, very honored by your presence and sharing all your knowledge. I'll share the floor to Dr. Evelyn right now for final remarks. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dominika, for leading the discussion, the questions. And thank you so much once again to both of our speakers. I think we're all really blown in our minds. We are getting a lot of texts, also in between that doctors say we want Horizon in our country, not only for the patients, but especially also for mapping the exposome. This would change so much the mindset of the governments to extend the longevity not only for all, but also for the whole planet. So thank you so much, and we are so inspired. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for doing what you are doing. It's excellent. The recordings will be available afterwards, as always. And at this point of time, I would just really like to also thank the entire team behind Longevity Education Hub. Again, this is a group of volunteers who are dedicating their time, their efforts to build this program and to spread it around the world and to organize those webinars and further concepts such as bringing the curriculum of longevity medicine into medical schools. And thank you every and each of you for being a part of that movement. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. All of our people here who are attendees, and welcome you to our next webinar.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
so much,
Take
Dr.
care.
Price and Dr. Zhang again. Thank you. Bye.